Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is that you're tuning in, thank you for stopping by. This is the Martell Group Fireside Chats, where each week we sit down with an industry expert and get their unique perspective on the world through the lens that we all know as sales and marketing. Today we sit down with Bob Childs from Manage Artworks. Now Bob is an expert in business development, but he had a very unique start to his career. Have a listen.
And look, I'm very fortunate. For me, in working in the art space, I still work with creative people, right?
Yeah.
And I get the opportunity to collaborate with them, and I am driven by coming up with ways to make them more effective, right?
Yeah.
It does give me that, it fulfills in me the association with creative and creative actions, but gives me really what makes me tick, if you will, is that ability to collaborate with people and help them achieve their goals. And that's another thing from a sales perspective, right? I'm not here to achieve goals. I'm here to help you achieve goals.
Right.
If I'm effective in that, I'm going to be successful.
It all snowballs. Now, the conversation you're about to hear with Bob was a really exciting one as we thread the needle between fine arts and business development. Without further ado, let's hop right into it. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Martell Group Fireside Chats. Appreciate you guys stopping by, tuning in wherever you are, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Appreciate you being here. Today I'm joined by an exciting guest, to be honest with you. I had a background. I had a pre-meeting with this guy, and I'm super excited because not only are we both involved in sales and marketing and all that sort of stuff, but we're also both musicians. So I'm excited to maybe potentially dig into that. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Bob Childs over in business development at Manage Artworks. So first off, Bob, how are we doing today?
We're doing great. Thank you for asking. Hope all's well with you.
Oh, I love that. I know holidays are coming up at the time of recording this, that we're about a week and a half away from Christmas, which is already kind of blowing my mind a little bit because I haven't finished my Christmas shopping. Just don't tell my wife. So I need to get on that pretty quickly.
Well, I would say it's probably the worst time to be in business development or sales because this is the period in the year where it just seems to grind to a halt. So
yeah,
some time, and I'm happy to join you here today.
Yeah, well, hey, I appreciate you being here. So let's set the stage just a little bit, Bob, before we start diving into some things and getting to hear, a lot of your feedback. I know you've got a nice breadth of history within the space and whatnot, but walk me through a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your story, if you will, and how you came to Manage Artworks. Whatever you want to do to set the stage, I'd love to hear it.
Excellent. So yeah, my background, my degree is in fine art, and graduating from college, I found that there were very few job opportunities for fine artists. And coupled with the fact that I wasn't very good, it led me into the world of commercial art, which is where I started design, creative services. But as I moved into the advertising agency business, I started to get really interested in technology. And from that point forward, technology was really the thread that was common through all of my job experiences. And I'm always, I guess by nature, I'm a lazy person. So I'm always looking for ways to do things a little bit easier.
Yeah.
I kind of experienced the early stages of what was considered the desktop revolution. So that fundamentally changed the creative process. And then as technology really took root with some of the devices that we've got, saw the evolution away from kind of traditional advertising, marketing, more tech-driven requirements, and found myself working in the software space, which was really a benefit because I'm working with Manage Artworks. As our name would indicate, we're heavily involved in the automation of artwork processes. Mm-hmm. That single source of truth to clients in pharma, CPG, retail. It's been an exciting journey. And I think, when you look at the technology space, I think there's a lot of very interesting things coming down the pike that I think are going to fundamentally change how we conceive and execute creative work.
I like that. So you touched a little bit then right there on what Manage Artworks does. So that kind of almost led me into my next question, specifically with what Manage Artworks does. So I heard CPG, I heard pharmaceuticals. Where else are you guys kind of helping to manage that?
That's pretty much the space for us, and it's obviously wide open. The focus for us at Manage Artworks is on any industry where there's a regulated process, right?
Okay.
So for us, um, the requirements, the government regulations, the legal implications of a bad Packer label, and having a mechanism in place to manage those projects, maintain that chain of custody of that asset, if you will,
Hmm.
and provide a space in which people can collaborate effectively, right? Is really what we do. So CPG and pharma and retail seem to be that sweet spot for us.
I'm curious about how we got to there, right? And you mentioned kind of like the blending of tech, the transition of tech. I know in the background of your shot there, it says AI. Now,
Mhm.
I'm going to go a little bit more on the personal side with this too, because I know
Sure.
that AI generated like artwork, at
Mhm.
least in a general sense, is kind
Mhm.
of a hot topic right now, especially in the creative space, in any sort of space, really. So first off, when was that transition that started happening where you could use that technology to start taking over the processes or to start making it a little bit more I guess regulated in a sense, or
Yeah.
automatic in a sense?
Well, I think in the early stages, as soon as the computers became powerful enough to
Hmm.
execute these programs, it's been a very kind of deliberate path, right? We've seen incremental gains in both productivity, accuracy, efficiency, things of that nature.
Hmm.
But I would say in the last couple of years, it's really with the artificial intelligence, the speed has increased exponentially, and the adoption of those technologies has been really phenomenal. So I think in the last 2 or 3 years, that's when it's really, I think, the code, if you will,
Hmm.
has really started to take over a lot of what those manual processes were. In the early stages, it still was reliant on people, their
Yeah.
eyes to execute the job. Sure, we had better tools, but they were still tools that required people to engage with them. And we're at a point now where, in all fairness, and to some extent, it diminishes that creative process. But now we're relying on machines to make some of those decisions and execute some of those ideas.
What would you say then is the balance between the human and the artificial intelligence? Because I would imagine that there still has to be some sort of human element just to like verify and make sure that everything's running smoothly or it's doing what it's supposed to. Is there a
Well,
split?
there is, and I think in fairness, I think we're seeing, at least from my perspective, less of a reliance on that human interaction. So if you look at a tool like Manage Artworks, where we have some of that artificial intelligence driving the review and approval process,
Hmm.
identifying any discrepancies, essentially proofreading that project, which
Sure.
was back to my agency days. We had 3 or 4 proofreaders on staff. We had 3 or 4 typesetters on staff, right? So we had a whole group of people involved in that process. We're at a point now where I think there's a real clear split between what we'll call that true creative activity and then the execution of that creative activity.
Hmm.
And I'll give you as an example. If you've got a client that's selling a can of beans, they have a design that's been executed by a top flight design agency. They've established what they call that brand identity. They have a
Hmm.
hierarchy of claims, a bunch of information that they've compiled into an executable design. No longer do we have to have a set of artists sitting there and adapting that, what we'll call hero can of beans, into all the SKU adaptations, the barbecue, the smoky, now a
Yeah.
machine can interpret that hierarchy and execute those changes, if you will, those brand extensions in a matter of seconds. And I think what's unfortunate is there is a group of people whose incomes and livelihoods was dependent on what we would call that production art process.
Hmm.
So I think we're at that point where that split has already occurred. If you're involved in the true creative process, coming up with the idea, understanding the mindset of the consumer, developing the strategy to address those consumer needs,
Hmm.
sure, I don't think that's going to go away right now. But I do think we're going to start to see, as algorithms become more sophisticated and they can associate, kind of consumer interest into an executable design. And I'll give you as an example. We've actually built a system that enables a consumer goods company to go out, scrub the web, identify competing brands, identify within those competing brands the hierarchy of claims, the color scheme,
Wow.
type of imagery. So, for instance, we may come back after looking at 1,000 different executions of a fish stick carton. We come back and say, hey, the best-selling ones have a blue background.
Hmm.
They have a picture of a fish and a picture of a dock, right? And that's the hierarchy of claims. So I think we're already seeing, machines begin to get at least halfway there in the creative process, certainly almost all the way there from a
Hmm.
production art process. Now, whether consumer goods companies and pharma companies adopt that technology, I think there's some things that they need to do in order to do that effectively. They need to organize their assets. They need to have a very clear brand message. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the, say, pharma or CPG side. But I think at the end of the day, within the next 2 years, I think we're going to see computer generated packages for both CPG and pharma.
Do you find that there's a large discussion around how original this technology can be? Because I know that, at least from my own experience and doing it on like a very personal side, not a
Mhm.
commercial sense, right? I've messed around with tools like Midjourney. I know that there's other tools like ChatGPT starting to come out with or whoever, OpenAI, excuse me, they've started to
Right,
do their own artwork type stuff, and it'll
right,
spit out images based on however short or long your description is, right? So I'm trying to bridge the gap in that sense where
right,
I'm just playing around with it for fun. You
right.
guys are utilizing that to, to help bring a brand awareness and connect it using a bunch of different factors. But is there a concern around originality and whether or not a computer can truly understand what will speak to like a consumer?
Yeah, I think there is, and I think there's some ethical issues around that as well. I
Yeah.
mean, how much when you scrape the web and you bring all these images in, are you, and you're not the originator of the idea, right? You're
Hmm.
not sitting there with a blank sheet of paper. You're gathering intel. How much of what that output is reflective of those inputs, and who owns those inputs, right? So I think there are certainly questions. I mean, for me, but I do think we've already opened up that Pandora's box. I think we're
Sure.
ready. We're ready for that, and I think the adoption. There's no doubt that the tools that are being used today are somewhat crude. But we talk, about music and music production.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not that long ago that the synthesizer was really brought into, the music world, and things like auto tune. And when you quantize a digital file from a music standpoint and kind of smooth out the changes in tempo or pitch, all these tools now are in really broad use and
Hmm.
factor into. I would argue that virtually every top pop hit these days has really had, frankly, in my view, more influence from the tech than it has in some ways than from the artist,
Yeah.
which I do think is unfortunate. So I agree with you. I think it's not a panacea, right? We're not going to solve every single design issue with this software.
Hmm.
I think it can be a very effective tool. I think it is highly dependent on those strategic inputs. What do you want to accomplish? Do I understand who is buying that carton of fish sticks? But I do think that we're going to start to see that broad adoption pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, along with like the originality comment, it also, I'm sure that the copyright side of discussion has come into, or maybe it hasn't, because I think about all of the artists that are out there right now,
Mhm.
where if they see another piece of art that is very similar to theirs, it's very similar to music, right? To go back to that example, where, how many songs out there have very, very similar beats, but maybe
Right.
didn't ask the original artist to reuse that or file for
Well,
a copyright use.
chord structure. I mean,
Hmm.
so
Bingo.
The one that I grew up with was, George Harrison getting sued by I guess it was the Ronettes for He's or the Chiffons for He's So
Hmm.
Fun, and co-opting that for My Sweet Lord. Look, I think at the end of the day, that's the lawyers are going to fight this out. I
Sure.
think, there's going to be a lot of litigation. So I would proceed if I were using, intel from the web and co-opting that for my purposes. Yes, I want to be certain that I'm not infringing on any copyrights that
Right.
may be in place. But I do think that that's going to be an issue for the attorneys to wrestle with. And I think that, again, we're already down that path. So they're just going to have to clean it up, because I don't think they're going to define necessarily the guardrails that people are going to have to operate in. I think they're going to have to adjust what the expectations are from a
Bingo.
copyright standpoint.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
I see it very much as still like a Wild West type thing too, where it's
absolutely.
not like, we're letting Jesus take the wheel and do whatever he wants with it, but there are some like guardrails that you can work within. Other than that, it's like, how creative can you be, or how descriptive can you be in terms
Right.
of working with like an AI system, and then from there it's whatever you're trying to accomplish with that technology, you can just go for it and just see what it spits out. And then, I always like to think of those things as like nothing's off the table until you really need to start chipping away at what you want out of the
Right.
project.
Yeah, and look, I'm certainly not advocating for, the dismissal of every creative director, because they bring a lot of value. And I think
Absolutely.
you hit on a great point, which is, what can they do to really establish the originality of the concept? But I think, in fairness, we've already seen kind of that Me Too approach in a
Yeah.
number of different ways. So you look at that from look, at the end of the day, it's the private label business in the retail space. When I'm sure when those design agencies receive an assignment from that private label company, they're scanning and saying, you know what, this cookie is blue and we want to sell a competing cookie, so we need to be blue on our packaging as well.
Yeah.
So I do think there's a lot at stake. And I think that goes back to just the overall impact of technology. I think we're seeing it across the board, right? And I think with deep fakes and some of the other AI issues that we're seeing, I think treading carefully is probably the best course of action at this point, because I think there's a lot more that we don't know than really what we do know.
Bob, talk to me about the strategy process behind all of this. So we've talked a lot about like what the technology itself does. How does this even get started? Or do you have like questionnaires that you go through? Is this more of like a broad, hey, what do you want done? How do we chip away at the stone? Like where does this process start to get from, start in concepts to finished product?
Well, from a software development standpoint with our product, it really starts with the client identifying that they have a need.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Of course.
and one of the great things for us is it's a bespoke system, so it's very highly customized. But without that need and an appreciation for efficiency, accuracy, economy, those key drivers, and I think I think, the shareholders of these organizations want profit levels to return to pre-COVID levels.
Sure.
So they're going to challenge their people to strip away any of that excess. And that's how we get started. I mean, one of the things from a sales standpoint that's difficult is really identifying that need. And so we rely on some technologies to drive that process, to understand what the market requirements are. But really, for us, from a business development standpoint, unless a company is willing to take a critical look at how they're conducting business today, and has the commitment and the foresight to adopt technical solutions, it becomes a non-starter for us. And we see that all the time. I mean, look, at the end, people are still getting work done without our technology. They may be using, ineffective tools, or maybe they're using that screwdriver to drive that nail, right? They're using
Sure.
a tool, but the wrong tool. Um, and so we're just looking for ways to show folks that there is in fact a better mechanism, and that adopting that is going to drive not just efficiency for us in that pack or label process, but overall efficiency in the organization.
How then, from a more broad perspective, right? Outside of managed artworks, or maybe even within, however you'd like to answer it, how are you keeping your axe sharpened so that you can portray that message to whomever it is that you're working on talking to a prospect? Do you have a process that you go through every day? Are you, trying to stay up to date on like continuing education style stuff? Like how does Bob keep the axe sharpened?
It's a great question. A guy who worked for me years ago, he said the best piece of advice that I gave to him was to read. And
Okay.
and I think that that's really the key. You can't stop learning. You can't stop looking with a critical eye. Stop looking at emerging trends,
Mm-hmm.
technologies, social issues, right?
Oh, good
Being
point.
aware. And I think that education serves two purposes. One, I think it certainly gives you enough intelligence to speak about your product or service in that sales role.
Mm-hmm.
It also gives you an opportunity to fundamentally connect with someone on a personal level. The broader you are, the better well read you are, the more aware you are of whether it's again social, economic, even trivial matters. Those opportunities, and we did it. We talked about music, right?
Mm-hmm.
In one of our early calls, we connected over that, and I think the more well read you are, the better aware you are of what's going on in the world today, the more effective I think you can be in a conversation with a client or a prospect.
Gotcha. Do you have any, specific places that you go to read? Do you have, is there like a one North Star that you have, or is it just like
Well,
wherever you could pull
it's
information in?
it's I'm an omnivore. I mean, in that
Love it.
regard, I'll consume whatever. And in fact, I mean, even on say a social or political issue, I'm more interested not in finding people who share my thinking, but in identifying people whose opinion or viewpoint I may not agree with, and try to understand why they have that point of view, and if there's any learning I can take away from that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not just, and it's a great question, and thank you for that. Like, how do you keep the axe
Yeah.
sharpened? It's a very active process. Yes, I need to read, I need to investigate, I need to watch, but I also need to have an open mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like that old line, and mind is like a parachute. They only work when they're open.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, at least for myself, right, I know that there's a lot of like structure that's involved for me, at least, right?
Mhm.
I know that I need to try and like time block or structure my day so that I can get that kind of like continuing education style time in for me to read or me to have an open
Mhm.
mind and things like that. So
Yeah.
I know those
And
things
I
are
think,
always important.
and I think organizations are more supportive good organizations are more supportive of that.
Mm-hmm.
They see that as part of an employee or coworker's growth, not as
Right.
a way for them to waste time, and I think, and I learned that in the agency business. I mean, I would laugh because the creative directors would be laying on a sofa in the creative lounge, and they'd be balling up piece of paper and throwing them at each other. And it looked like they were playing, but out of that play session, if you will, what we from the outside might have thought as, people slacking off,
Yeah.
they were thinking, and they were coming out, and they were spitballing ideas, and they may have sat there for an hour, and at the end of that hour, come up with two or three great ideas for an ad campaign.
Kind of like breaking the mold a little bit. I mean,
It is.
I
It
know
is.
I need to walk out of the office every now and again because it's just like I need to think, I need to do something else, I need to get my body moving. All of
Absolutely.
that falls under the same umbrella, right?
Yeah, completely agree. Yes.
Now, at the time of this recording, everyone who's out there watching or listening, whatever it is, it's technically a week and a half before Christmas. Like I said, it's a little hard to believe, but by the time that this is kind of will be posted and everything like that, we'll be into 2024. So, Bob, I'm interested and curious from your position, What are some things that you're working on to really set up 2024 to just kind of hit it out of the gate? Because that's a theme for everyone that I talk to. That's a theme for us even at Martell, right? Is,
Right.
starting off, it should be everyone's goal, right? Starting off the new year, right? Making sure that you're hitting the ground running. You've got all your ideas in sync, things of that nature. What does that look like for you? Whether it's you personally, you manage artworks, like how are you setting yourself up for 2024?
I think for us, it really is identifying the resources that we think are going to help us move the needle.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the Martell Group was a key component of that.
Yeah.
We had the opportunity to work, and I think again, the thing that made the relationship work was really setting very clear and achievable objectives, right? Harmonizing our message across all of our potential target business sectors, and then putting in place some technology and tools that enabled us to identify the right prospect at the right time.
Hmm.
So I think this is, and the only kind of change in this time of year is how quickly things slow down. But I think any point in the sales process, you're well served by taking that critical look at, do we have the right resources out there to deliver our message, to engage at the initial stages?
Mm-hmm.
Can we follow through and deliver on the promises? Do we have the internal resources from a project management, code development, whatever standpoint to fulfill those promises? And then do we have the mechanisms in place to ensure that we remain on track in that relationship?
Mm-hmm.
So I think for us, it doesn't kind of start and stop, on Jan 2, if you will.
Sure.
I think it's an ongoing process, and I think you can engage at any point. The thing that I think we've learned is that the client need is going to pop up when it pops up, and we have very little control over that. What we need to do is, again, ensure that our message is being delivered by the right people.
Mm-hmm.
We've given them, kind of that grist for the mill, right? That we're giving them, whether it's the messaging, a specific set of targets that we've identified through some other technologies that we use. We're big believers in the use of intent data,
Mm-hmm.
which I think has fundamentally changed the way our pipeline was built. And then ultimately, again, making sure that we're planning for success, right? All too often, the business plan is driven by top line, filling the funnel, driving sales, achieving revenue goals. But really, the challenge is, you got to fulfill on that. Companies are more likely to fail because they're not satisfying client need than I think they are in failing to attract new clients.
And honestly, you kind of answered where I was going with that question too. Kind of like a part two to that. It was like, what are the KPIs that you're tracking on through that, right? And obviously, like revenue is something that's at the top of everyone's mind, right? We'd be lying to ourselves if we said that
Right.
that wasn't on the table. But it sounds like something else that you kind of said there was building that relationship with the end client, the end user, whomever it is, being able to meld that into a relationship, because that's probably the better ticket, at least if we're comparing things, right? That's probably the better ticket to hold on to than trying to go out there and just start knocking on doors, both of which are necessary. But
Absolutely.
maintaining relationships, at least in my mind, seems to be, the one thing that should always be a constant in strategy throughout any sort of year.
I agree. And it's always been amazing to me how little attention that concept gets.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'll use an old sales line, when you're over the wall, right, you can continue to sell. And I think that goes back to one of your earlier questions is, how do you keep the axe sharp? Stay engaged.
Mm-hmm.
Ask your client, what have your experiences been? If you identify a trend, let's say in, a CPG space, how do you share that back? How do you give your client not just the intel, the raw intel,
Mm-hmm.
but the data, but give them a way to maybe relate that back to how you're servicing their business, right?
Yeah.
So line extensions. If you see that a specific target audience is ripe for line extensions, okay, well, let's use our technology to fulfill that. But I do think that's again another old sales line. It's a losing a client versus it's a new piece of business. It's going to take you a lot longer to grow revenue if you're constantly churning from
Hmm.
those relationships because you're not paying attention. And I think that a lot of that comes from a genuine sense of caring.
Bingo.
I talked at the outset, for us, it's easy to get caught up in those numbers. What's their revenue per employee? What's your gross revenues? How much can
Right.
you spend? But at the end of the day, it becomes a people business. And I think if you can empathize with what that client is experiencing and provide support, in some ways just moral support, but ideally support from the programs and tools that you provide,
Hmm.
then I think it can be a real win. If you're always looking out for the client and their best interests, you're going to be successful. I think when you focus on the bottom line or the top line, I think you're missing a massive part of what makes for a successful relationship.
I had this conversation with the last podcast guest, Meredith. We talked a lot about being kind of like socially set up for this.
Mhm.
Like you can have the best, I mean, just top tier marketing strategy, right? You can
Mhm.
have everything lined up. We're going to roll out this messaging and this email and all that sort of stuff. But there is a massive social component to sales that it almost feels like it gets missed sometimes, or maybe that's the last axe that's sharpened in terms of an order, to where it doesn't really get the attention it needs. So that you can't have genuine conversations, which then translates to the message you're trying to portray. And it's all connected in a line.
Oh, I completely agree. And in fact, I agree with you and say that to me, look at if you look at the competing tools in any industry where there's competition, for the most part, there's some parity across platforms, tools, resources, fish sticks, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it comes down to do I connect with that brand on an emotional level? And in sales, do I connect with that sales representative, account manager,
Hmm.
business development person on a personal level? Do I get the impression from them that they really care about my business and are willing to put the time in to represent me
Yeah.
in their organization? And I think that's one of the key things we often say, in that account management role. Uh, we're not representing the business to the client. We're representing the client to the company,
Bingo.
right? My job is to be the client's advocate. And look, I've come into under some fire for that. You're always taking the client's side. Well, yes, I am, because
Hmm.
from the very beginning of our relationship, I promised that I would have their back, that I would always look out for their best interest. And for us, that's one of our guiding principles, obsessive focus on the customer. So yes, um, don't kind of nick me if you feel like I'm taking the client side, because I'm always going to take the client side in those relationships. Now, I think there's some balance, right?
Of
If I
course.
I'll push back, but to push back, I think I have to earn that right to push back to a client by doing an effective job of representing them. And I think that starts at the very earliest stages. And I go back to the relationship with Martel. You know, in the earliest stages, the people who worked with us from that team genuinely cared, communicated that to us, but we knew that the way they were communicating that to us was the way they were communicating that to our prospects. And it was sincere and genuine. And it was in that regard very successful. And it does go to what we talked a little bit about, keeping that act sharp, being aware of kind of social dynamics, being able to, not make some of the mistakes that people who aren't maybe as aware of social dynamics,
Hmm.
in the old days, ignore the three women in the room and spin the message to the guy because you think the guy is the leader of the group, and it turns out that he's the more junior person,
Right.
and and just based on a gender bias, right? You made some assumptions. So being aware of that, and training yourself to be aware of that, I think is going to yield much better results than pure reliance on, an algorithm, if you will.
Bob, I'm curious because you mentioned, and hopefully I remember this correctly. You mentioned having a fine arts degree. Did I remember that correctly? I'm curious because we had this discussion a couple podcasts ago. I think that it was not everyone goes to college with the intention of going into sales. It's something that you kind of fall forward into, or something that you use and then you kind of start growing within that role and stuff like that. I'm kind of the same way myself, right? My degree is in environmental sciences, but I have a little
Right.
bit of a business background that kind of led me down this path. How much do you find yourself utilizing that degree, if at all, in what you do today? I'm curious to see if there is a bridge that kind of connects one to the other.
Very little for
Okay,
me.
that's fair.
I went into college as a pre-med student.
Ah,
Um, Found out quite candidly that I was very poorly prepared. I went to a competitive school.
hmm
Uh, the people who were in that program were focused, committed, and had been trained in their high school careers for that path. I went in kind of wide-eyed, um, and ultimately found more often gravitating to creative efforts. And so, yeah, I got the degree in fine art. Now, I think what art that degree has enabled me to do is, again, be a little bit more sensitive to aesthetics, not just visual aesthetics, but
yeah.
aesthetics in general. So it wasn't the specific knowledge base that I acquired, but more the specific, or actually the general awareness of, dynamics and people. And
hmm
it was a difficult process, but you know to me, the fine art world and the true expression of creative versus the commercial art world were very different enterprises. And at the end of the day, again, I didn't see. I had hopes of becoming a billboard painter, but right at the point was when billboards switched to those pre-printed panels or
Oh
pre.
yeah, of course.
So billboard painting was off the table. But no, I it was less about the specific skills that I was looking to acquire and more just a general sense of, wow, there's a whole different world out there. And I was fortunate enough to get a job in commercial art. And then for me, over the course of time, the execution, the creative process became less important than the technology. I really found the technology because I could see some things happening with tech that frankly were very exciting.
Yeah.
I think there's a darker side that we've all come to experience in the last few years, and specifically with social media and the impact. But not a lot of application from what I picked up in college, to what I'm doing here today.
Yeah, and I'm sure that that helps too. Because what I find is that I talk with a lot of sales executives or sales folks, people that are mainly in the sales side of the funnel, right? They're more in business development or whatever. But I see that there's a lot of people who have a little bit of a marketing flavor background, right?
Mhm.
There is a
Mhm.
little bit of a sense for, just like you said, the creative process in
Mhm.
understanding, you know, that every marketing person is going to go through this. So how do I set up my sales role to help work with the marketing department instead of like walking to a marketing department and saying, "Hey,
Right.
this is the graphic that I need. Can you make it?" It's like, "Hey, these are the elements that I'm looking for. Let's work together to design something." And I find that bridge, the people who are on that bridge or who even have that bridge in general, at least in my mind, seem to have a better grasp on what the whole process is, and they can then present that in a better fashion to whoever the client or the end user is.
I think, and you use a great word there, which is that collaboration. I think
hmm
that's what drove me from that kind of creative art director role into kind of managing departments and then, managing some organizations. But it really was driven by, and look, I'm very fortunate, for me, in working in the art space, I still work with creative people, right?
Yeah.
And I get the opportunity to collaborate with them, and I am driven by coming up with ways to make them more effective, right?
Yeah.
So it does give me that, it fulfills in me the association with creative and creative actions, but gives me really what makes me tick, if you will, is that ability to collaborate with people and help them achieve their goals. And that's another thing from a sales perspective, right? I'm not here to achieve goals. I'm here to help you achieve goals.
Right.
If I'm effective in that, I'm going to be
It
successful.
all snowballs.
It does. But if I focus on being successful to the exclusion of helping you achieve your goals, it's a very short-lived relationship.
Well, I know we're kind of coming up on time, and funny enough, you and I took bets on whether or not what timing we'd be over or under. We both took the over, and it looks like we're both walking away with a little bit of money had we put some
There
on the
you go.
table. So, in the interest of time, I want to start to kind of wrap some things up here, and I appreciate everything that you've shared. I think this has been a really really good conversation, and honestly, maybe we have to have like a reunion tour or something like that,
Okay,
kind of come
let's
back
do it.
together. But in the meantime, what I wanted to do is just kind of give you the floor for maybe the last few minutes or so. If there's any sort of like advice that you would have for somebody who's either early in their career, or even anybody who's later in their career, right? You've given a couple tidbits and great nuggets of information, but somebody comes to you, they're looking for a little bit of advice. Outside of maybe what you've shared, do you have anything else that you might impart on somebody to kind of help them out
Um,
in their career?
Yeah, I think a thick skin and persistence.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, I think again, we're so driven to succeed, as kind of a species, if you will, most people, and especially salespeople. Um, but there's a lot of things that have to fall into place for you to win the account, win the job, get the relationship going. And so much is driven by timing and the competition for your audience's attention.
Yeah.
Be persistent, continuously bring ideas to the table. Picking up the phone and saying, "Hey, do you want to hire me, or do you want to buy from me?"
Yeah.
Is really gonna isn't gonna resonate, I think, with someone. But if you're bringing ideas, I saw this article on LinkedIn about marketing. Maybe it's of interest to you, and stay engaged, stay front of mind, because it's an easy business when you're in that business development role to get beaten down. I mean, for every 60, 70 no's, you may get one or two yeses.
Yep.
When you get that yes, it's just such a rewarding thing. So I would say don't be patient, be persistent, and be consistent in what you're trying to accomplish.
I love that, especially the part about, saying whether you get 60, 70, 80, even 100 no's, you get one yes out of that. Those no's
So
don't matter anymore, right?
exactly.
You get all the confidence in the world, you get all of the drive out of the one yes because you know now that it's possible and you're
Right.
capable.
And
And
then
then
look and say, what did I do there? How can I repeat that?
bingo.
What made that email, that call resonate with that individual? Could just be right time. Maybe they had a label recall and they need a system to manage packaging. But it might just be that you're bringing ideas to the table. And look, people want to be associated with creative thinkers, with people who are looking at new ways to accomplish the goal, right? Nobody wants to go back and say, I've got this great old typesetting machine that we want to sell you, right? It doesn't work that way. So I
Right.
think if you stick to it and you're genuine and sincere, I think you'll be successful.
I love that. I think that's a perfect way to kind of end off the conversation here and kind of give everybody a little nugget to take home and hopefully apply to, to anything that they're working on in their careers, whether it be sales, marketing, or anything outside of that. I think that has a lot to say to just about anyone.
That's
So
great.
Perfect. Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, this is Bob Childs over in business development at Managed Artworks. Great guy. Hopefully you guys got a chance to learn from Bob here. And like I said, I would love to kind of revisit this conversation, do a reunion tour in a couple different months here. And then maybe we can dig more into like the musical side that we got a chance to dive into off the camera and whatnot. So, but for the time being, Bob, thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate it. Look forward to the next conversation. But until then, happy holidays. Hope you have a good one.
Happy holidays. Chris, thanks so much. It was great being on the show.
Shout out once again to Bob for spending some time with us for this fireside chat. I really enjoyed getting to hear Bob's journey from fine arts to commercial art and how technology played an underlying role in all of that. If you have a favorite part that you enjoyed, feel free to leave a comment down below and let us know your thoughts on this chat with Bob. Be sure to like the video, consider hitting the subscribe button, and turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when future chats go live on our channel. Thanks for listening, and as always, happy hunting.